Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with tests, school, and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is unlocking automatic scholarships with PSAT, SAT, and ACT scores. But first, let's meet our special guest, Shaan Patel.
Dr. Shaan Patel is the founder and CEO of Prep Expert, the company he founded to help high school students achieve their dreams. Featured on Shark Tank, he closed a deal with Mark Cuban for an investment in Prep Expert. At Prep Expert, Shaan has helped more than 100,000 students improve their SAT and ACT scores, get into top colleges, and win over $100 million in scholarships. Prep Expert offers online SAT and ACT courses, academic tutoring, and college admissions consulting. Welcome.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Mike, for having me.
Shaan, we are really happy to have you on the show, and not just because the topic of connecting scholarships to test scores is one that we want to always talk about, but because you, Shaan, have one of the most well-known and fascinating stories in test prep. We'd love to, before we launch into talking about scholarships, hear a bit about you and your history.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I really kind of stumbled into test prep. It wasn't, my planned career path, but it came out of my own experience. I went to high school in Las Vegas, Nevada, and if you know anything about Vegas, it's not exactly known for its best education system. But I was lucky. I had parents who took education really seriously, so I was always a really good student, straight A's in middle school, high school, etc. But I was not a very good standardized test taker, had a lot of test anxiety, didn't know the first thing about SATs, ACTs. Parents didn't go to college in the United States. And so in my very first SAT, I barely scored above average. And it was like 1760 out of the 2400 scales when I took it. I think average back then was around 1500 out of the 2400. So I was a little bit above average, but nothing crazy. And so I spent hundreds of hours in the library then studying for the SAT. Eventually raised my score 640 points to get it perfect. Yeah, it was an incredible improvement. Got 640 points score improvement to a perfect SAT score. And as you guys know, that's like a 0.02% chance. So, pretty rare thing that completely unlocked and changed my life, which is I got into some of the nation's top universities, got a $500,000 in scholarships and awards, which I know we're going to talk a lot about today. So I basically, when I got to college, and I ended up just choosing to go to the University of Southern California's BSMD program. And I know you guys know how competitive BSMD programs are, on a full tuition scholarship. And both of those things were really made possible through my SAT score, along with, the other things I did in high school, but definitely BSMD programs, they require the highest levels of SAT, ACT scores, and same with, full tuition scholarship at USC. So I chose to go there. But when I got to college, I was like, I'd love to help other students change their lives the way that I did through test prep. And so I began on this journey to write a test prep book before, I went to medical school, which was the plan. And, what was funny is I got rejected by 100 literary agents and publishers. They were like, the SAT prep market's too competitive. You don't have a platform to write such a book. And I was like, oh, it'll be great though. Like, it's for a perfect score student writing it about his own experience and the strategies that really worked for him, et cetera. So, I got rejected a bunch, and eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to take all this material I've written and turn it into a course. And in my very first 6-week SAT course that I ever taught, my students had an average score improvement. There was 18 kids in it total, and they had an average score improvement of 376 points.
Which is amazing, right?
Yeah, which was pretty cool. Obviously, it was easier to do on the 2400 version to get those massive score
right?
improvements.
Yes.
But it was still impressive nonetheless. Eventually, McGraw-Hill started paying attention. They gave me the book deal that I originally wanted. We had parents wanting more courses. I began training other instructors to teach my curriculum, and the rest is history. As you mentioned, Amy, now we've helped over 100,000 students over the past 15 years at Prep Expert improve their test scores, get into top colleges, and win over $100 million in
Yeah.
scholarships, which I know what we're going to talk about today.
Amy, I was thinking about how much Sean's history with test prep or his test scores in high school mirrored your journey until he got that perfect score.
My scores did improve, but not as substantially as yours did, Shaan. And I was the one in high school making fun of my friends who were doing test prep. So the
Oh,
irony of
wow.
life to land in this industry when I was very much sort of like, oh, why would you do that? But we obviously, all of
Yes.
us now can attest to the fact that, you know, test scores unlock doors. And certainly in this particular case, discover buried treasure in scores that turn into money. So, can you tell us a little bit about, how do SAT or ACT scores translate into this kind of guaranteed scholarship money?
Yeah, so one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of parents, students, and families come to us, especially because we a lot of elite and high achieving folks will want those top scores, is they're so fixated on only Ivy League universities or Ivy plus. And the problem sometimes with those universities is they don't offer any merit-based aid. And so if your family doesn't qualify for any need-based financial aid, they're going to expect you to pay, 70, 80, $90,000 a year in annual tuition, plus all the costs of college. And I say that jokingly because the numbers keep going up every single
Sure.
year. And so, what I really encourage all parents, students, families is, there's nothing wrong with applying to the Ivy League and, Ivy plus colleges, but there's tons of great universities out there that offer merit-based scholarships, including really prestigious places like Duke University, Johns Hopkins, University of Chicago, Vanderbilt, where I went, University of Southern California, University of Texas at Austin. And all of these places, they will offer merit-based aid. So to make sure you're also applying to these universities, because many times you don't even need a separate application. They will just see that you're a standout student based on your test scores, based on your grades, extracurriculars, and offer you a half tuition, full tuition scholarship, et cetera.
I love that you're mentioning this idea of there's sort of two kind of paths for high scores, one of which you mentioned, which was traditionally what I think a lot of our parents consider is we want a high test score for those selective institutions. But I would definitely say what's kind of funny, and Mike, I'm wondering if you observed this too, right around 2007, 2008, post recession, we started seeing a very different interest in test scores for the specific reason you're mentioning, which is just obviously how a test score translates into money. But it is sort of a choice sometimes, right? As far as, are you going to leverage the test score for more selective admission? Or are you trying to leverage that score for money? And certainly, as we've seen the cost of college, rise and rise, and many students wanted to go on to continue, higher ed for grad school degrees, medical degrees. You want to try to minimize how much money you have to, spend at the undergrad level because you might be wanting to spend it, later on.
Yeah, and it's not an either or, right? The higher your scores, the more opportunities you have to
Correct.
access more competitive programs and to earn merit aid. I think that that's kind of like the idea that it's true that the ultra selective schools, they're not giving scholarships based on what are basically the cost of entry, perfect grades and test scores. But there are so many other schools that will, and there's a value proposition that is hard to turn down when you can think about getting a world-class education and not having to pay or paying very little, right, Sean? That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and that was the position I was in high school. I had gotten into, Brown University, Northwestern, Berkeley, Johns Hopkins. None of them gave me any merit-based aid, but then USC said, here's a full tuition scholarship. Villanova, a bunch of other places that had BSMD programs gave me full tuition scholarships, and I was just like, it's really hard to turn down. And it's the best decision I ever made because I graduated with no student debt. And,
Mhm.
actually USC was writing me checks at the end of every semester. So I was getting paid to go to school, which is, pretty awesome.
An occupation. your
Yeah,
your
yeah,
education is your occupation at that point in
yeah,
time,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But it is an interesting, like my daughter received a presidential scholarship and it was a full ride. And
Yeah.
it was not to an institution that actually, there's a funny story. We wouldn't pay for the application fee because we're like, oh, you're not going to go there. And then when she received a full ride, it was like, well, wait a second. Maybe
Hmm.
we do need to think about just sort of the real cost of college. And again, like you said, like more advanced degrees, wanting to spend the money later and not earlier in her education.
Yeah, and I knew I was going to medical school because I was in the BSMD program, so I wanted to minimize that undergrad cost as much as possible. So definitely, to your point, Amy, for students looking for grad school, it makes total sense to minimize the undergrad cost as much as possible. Yeah.
Now, we've talked on the podcast before about PSATs. We have a number of different episodes on PSATs and the National Merit Scholarship Program. So we've explored that a little bit, but why don't you share a little bit with us about how does the PSAT connect to National Merit and the whole scholarship program?
Yeah, so the PSAT is often overlooked by parents and students. They think, oh, it's just the pre-SAT preliminary, just practice, doesn't matter. But it matters so much because the PSAT is also the NMSQT, which stands for National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. Why is that a big deal? Well, one, national merit helps your students stand out on the college application. It's a great award to put. Two, about half of the semifinalists, maybe a little less than half, get a $2,500 scholarship to anywhere they want to attend. But none of those things compare to what national merit is really valuable for, which is there are over 100 colleges and universities across the nation that will automatically give your student a quarter tuition, half tuition, or in many cases, full tuition scholarship just for being national merit. And how do you get national merit? Well, you need to score high on the PSAT. And I know the automatic question, the parents and everyone listening is like, well, how high do you need to score? It's typically going to be the top 1% in your state. So if you live in a very academically competitive state like Massachusetts, that cutoff score is going to be higher, closer to like 1460, 1470 out of 1520. If you live in a less academically competitive state like where I'm from in Nevada, you only need to score around a 1350, 1360
Wow,
out of that
yeah.
1520. So
We
it
in Ohio
really
are in a
can
sweet
vary.
spot. We're in a kind of like in between there, which
Yeah.
makes it something for some students, meaning, it's I don't want to say it's attainable for every student because you only really get one shot at it that junior year of taking the PSAT. But we always say if you're going to do any prep for SAT, why wouldn't you prep for the PSAT and sort of kill two birds with one stone and potentially qualify, for the program? And like you're saying, there are a lot of schools that they offer scholarships that are not national merit scholarships, but they only offer these select scholarships to those students who might have qualified, as a national merit finalist. And so I know for us in Ohio, like Denison, Fordham,
Mhm.
Alabama, those are some of the schools that our students will look at because they do award full tuition to those finalists.
Yeah. Yeah, even where I went, University of Southern California offers a half tuition scholarship, which is worth like 130, 150 grand now, over 4 years. I mean, when you look at the 4 year amounts that some of these universities that give national merit students, I mean, on the East Coast, you have Northeastern University. On the West Coast, you have Washington State University. You have Arizona State. I believe Arizona University as well. So, as you mentioned, Fordham. There's over 100. There's just so many. And I want to clarify the audience, like they're not giving these out just philanthropically. The reason they're giving them out is because the more national merit students they have attending their universities, the higher they can get in the US News rankings. So it is a mutually beneficial reason for why they want to attract these national merit students. Yeah.
Well, they don't want to just attract them, right? There's this idea that if you invest in education and you draw in really academically strong individuals, they might want to stick around after they
Hmm.
graduate. And then you really build up some intellectual capital.
Yeah.
I do want to
Yeah,
mention
couldn't
one
agree.
thing to our audience, though, is if they're, thinking about pursuing, like, let's say, preparation for the PSAT, they do want to remember that that starts way earlier, right? Like, for example, I don't know what you guys, but in Ohio, we're looking for our PSAT students to get started as soon as sophomore year is over. They've got that whole summer to amp up to take that PSAT in the fall of their junior year. But again, like I mentioned earlier, A lot of times with SATs and ACTs, we have a whole school year we could work with. But PSATs are unique in that you really do have to launch that prep early to be really prepared by that October test date.
Yes, and as we discuss all the time, if you're someone who has the potential to earn the National Merit Scholarship qualifying score, you should be taking the SAT
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
ACT at the beginning of junior year as well. And
100%.
that's really like that's a whole other timeline conversation, but they do work really well together that students who are capable of unlocking some of these amazing scholarships based on their PSAT scores may see the PSAT as the last of these exams they have to take.
hmm it's really nice when they can get it knocked out early. And I know a lot of high school counselors are listening, so I'd like to change the I don't know, there's something out there in the rhetoric that, counselors often say, "Oh, you don't need to do test prep until spring of your junior
Oh,
year."
right.
And I hate that advice because I'm
Oh
just like,
yeah.
you totally missed the PSAT if you wait until spring of your junior year. Because the PSAT, I don't think we mentioned it, happens typically in October of your 11th grade. So you've got to start your test prep earlier, ideally in ninth, 10th grade, so you can knock the PSAT out of the park by 11th grade in October. Yeah.
100%. We see all the time that the students who are capable of the highest scores, they're too busy in the spring with APs, finals,
Mhm.
things like that. They can't really focus on testing. They can take care of testing early in 11th grade. Let's talk about the students that are not thinking that they're going to score in the top 1% of test takers. Because National Merit Scholarship, that's the way it goes, right? Especially if you live in a competitive state like mine in New York, in New Jersey, Connecticut, the list goes on. Um, at what point do some of these other scholarships that are associated with both PSAT and SAT and ACT scores start to become possible? Does a student really need to earn 99th percentile scores to access some of these scholarship opportunities?
No, definitely not. I'd say a good cutoff score to think about would be around 1,300 on the SAT and around 28, 29 on the ACT is when you're really going to start seeing many colleges start to offer you potential scholarship opportunities. So, for example, the Bright Future Scholarship in Florida.
We love that.
Yeah, the ACT, I think, cutoff is around 29 and the SAT is about 1330. Don't quote me, but it's around those cutoffs. So it's far from needing the top 1%. And Bright Futures opens up full tuition scholarships at a lot of Florida universities for Florida students. But that's just one example out of hundreds across across the nation of universities that offer scholarships. It may not always be full tuition, but even if you get half tuition, quarter tuition, et cetera, at those levels, it can be a huge help in terms of dollars saved on your college education.
And I think it's interesting what we're talking about is that at some of these big state institutions, that's where actually potentially you will find, oftentimes more money than like sometimes a smaller private scholarship that you fill out your own little application. Like the schools themselves are very often the places where students will see the greatest scholarships you can usually receive, through the universities. And I love that you mentioned Bright Futures because you're right. Like that's just for those people living in Florida, it's an amazing opportunity to really cut the cost of college because those scores turn into automatic dollars down
Mm.
there. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and there other states there's a Hope Scholarship in Georgia. I think there's some similar ones. So what we're really talking about, and this is something that you learned personally, Shaan, that investing time and resources into earning your best test scores can return dollars on the penny in terms of like how much you leverage you can get 10 times or more your investment. And some changes in the US tax code have made
Mhm.
test prep even more explicitly a quality investment. What am I talking about here, Shaan?
Yeah, so as of the summer of 2025, Congress has now made college 529 savings plans eligible for use on a lot of services outside of just college, including what we're talking about here today, which is test prep. So not only are the SAT and ACT fees now eligible for College 529 savings plans to be used, but also the tutoring associated with not only SAT, ACT, but academic tutoring, which is a huge help for families because now you have, tax savings on your educational investment, which in some cases could be 20, 30, 40% savings on top, right? And so um, every College 529 savings plan is different. So I would check with your state's plan administrator. But from what I'm seeing on the ground, many parents are simply able to submit their receipts for their test prep to their College 529 savings provider and get reimbursement for those funds, which is great.
Yeah, I love that. For the longest time, we would have to answer questions. Can I use my 529? Can I use my 529? The answer has always been no. And now, at last, at least in many places, the answer is going to be yes. You can use 529 funds to pay for test prep.
And what I
Yeah.
love about that is how you can take money you've saved, right, to achieve a better score. And then with that better score, you might be able to use it to actually reduce the tuition bill. So it's such a way of like kind of paying that savings forward, that I think is just an amazing opportunity for families. And if they don't have a 529 plan, and they should absolutely be considering doing it because of that ability to do so for sure.
Yeah.
So, what can you share maybe as being some of the most effective strategies for students to be able to try to maximize their scores, for scholarship opportunities?
Yeah, so the most effective strategy I can say regarding scholarship opportunities is one thing that we have not touched on today, but that really maximized my own scholarship opportunities is, uh, when I was in high school, I applied for 100 scholarships in my senior year. It was crazy.
That's a
I
full time
ended up,
job.
yeah. I ended up winning 20 scholarships, but when I did the analysis of all the ones, and these are not the university ones
Hmm.
that were just offered to me,
Right,
but when I
sure.
did the analysis of the 20 scholarships I won, 19 of them were local. So local to my state, local to my city, local to my community. And it made total sense, right? Because I wasn't competing against the other 49 states worth of students. So I highly recommend parents and students, rather than always applying to big national scholarship applications, which they're great, but they're very hard to win because they have 100,000 applications, like trying to win the lottery.
Right, sure.
um, you know Go to your local community, look for scholarships in your city, in your state, in your community. There's a lot of money sitting there that people are just either not applying for, or there's so few applications you could really be able to capture those scholarship dollars. And people might say, oh, well, $1,000, $2,000, but if you get 10 of those, it starts to
Right.
really add up, right? And some of them are 5 grand, some of them are 10 grand, and so it can really make a significant difference in your college savings.
And a lot of kids, they don't think about that until after they graduate and they have that first, sort of like loan payment, like, oh, this is why I should have, tried to look out for more scholarship opportunities. And I often say too, to students, it's kind of like it could be a little bit of a part-time job to try to find those scholarships and apply, but the return again is probably way better than the amount of money you could put away working a part-time job, let's say your junior or senior year of high school. So it can be certainly time well spent. The other comment I want to make is Mike and I have definitely been involved in scholarship committees where like kind of local, like what you're describing. And it is shocking how few students apply for those scholarships. Like they really have no idea. Mike and I have offered a test and the rest scholarship in the past. We've been involved in the National Test Prep Association, Gene Lucas Scholarship. And it is interesting sometimes the likelihood of a student winning by just taking the time to write the essay or submit the application.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's just so much out there that I think people are not realizing. It's right under their nose, and you find out too late, to your point. I mean, Amy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Sean, this is fantastic. We love this topic. We love hearing your expertise, and we'd love to talk about this all day. unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And for parents and students who are looking to learn more about, services that I could help them with, whether it's me or my team with online SAT and ACT courses, as well as a bunch of free resources we give from free ebooks, webinars about scholarships, test prep, college admissions, they can head to my website. It's prepexpert.com. We'd be happy to help any families who are listening.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.